Termination revenge. I held the key to their $300 million merger collapse. Office politics. I never thought I would be betrayed by someone I trusted completely. Especially not in a boardroom full of people who once respected me. My name is Mia, and 6 months ago, I was living what I thought was my dream life, senior analyst at Meridian Corp, on track for promotion, engaged to my college sweetheart who happened to work in the same building. I thought I had it all figured out. It wasn't just the public humiliation of being escorted out with my belongings in a cardboard box. It was the way my fiancé, David, couldn't even look me in the eye as security walked me past his office. I never thought he could hurt me like that, but what I didn't realize was how much deeper his betrayal went. Or how perfectly positioned I was to change everything. As I stood in that elevator, clutching my box of personal items, feeling invisible and disposable, I realized I had a choice. I could continue to let this define me, sink into victimhood, or I could choose to change everything. I didn't know how it would unfold, but one thing became crystal clear: my life, and theirs, would never be the same again. The morning it happened, I remember thinking it was going to be just another Tuesday. I had my usual oat milk latte, checked my emails, and reviewed the final compliance documents for the Hartwell Meridian merger, the deal that would transform our mid-sized firm into a $300 million powerhouse. I'd spent 18 months of my life ensuring every regulatory detail was perfect, every risk assessment documented, every compliance requirement met to the letter. I was proud of that work. More than proud, I was invested in it, body and soul. Late nights, missed dinners with David, and sacrificed weekends. All for this moment when Meridian Corp would finally get the recognition it deserved in the industry. When I would finally get the recognition I deserved, the irony wasn't lost on me later. As I was organizing the final merger documents in my desk that morning, David walked by and flashed me that smile, the one that used to make my stomach flutter. The one I thought meant we were building something beautiful together. "Big day coming up, babe," he said, stopping to squeeze my shoulder. "You ready for this?" I should have heard the edge in his voice. I should have noticed how his hand lingered just a second too long, like he was saying goodbye. But I was so focused on the merger, so convinced that my meticulous work was about to pay off for everyone, that I missed every single warning sign. At 2:47 p.m. Jenny from HR appeared at my cubicle with 2 security guards I'd never seen before. The entire floor went silent. You know that suffocating quiet that happens when everyone stops pretending to work and starts openly staring. "Mia Chen, we need you to come with us," Jenny said. Her voice artificially gentle in that way people use when they're about to destroy your life. "There must be some mistake," I said, my voice smaller than I intended. "I have the Hartwell meeting at 4. The final merger review." Jenny's face was a mask of professional sympathy. "There's been a change in personnel assignments. You're no longer with the company, effective immediately." The words hit me like ice water. No explanation. No warning. No conversation. Just over. 18 months of my expertise, my dedication, my late nights poring over every detail of their most important deal, dismissed like I was nothing more than a temp who'd overstayed her welcome. As they escorted me out, I caught glimpses of my former colleagues. Some looked shocked, others relieved they weren't in my shoes. But David was standing in his office doorway, and when our eyes met through the glass, he turned away. Actually turned his back on me. The man I was supposed to marry in 8 months couldn't even watch me leave. Walking through that lobby with my cardboard box, I felt something crack inside me. Not break, crack. Like a windshield hit by a stone, spreading fractures that would only get deeper with time. I had trusted them with my career, my future, my heart. And they had discarded me like yesterday's coffee grounds. But here's what they didn't know, what nobody knew. As I sat in my car in the parking garage, tears streaming down my face, I had copies of everything. Every email, every risk assessment, every regulatory filing. Not because I planned this, but because I was thorough. Obsessively, perfectly thorough. Will I choose to stay silent, or will I take control of my own story? Sitting in my car that day, I realized the termination wasn't the first betrayal, it was just the loudest one. The real damage had been happening in whispers, in sideways glances, in meetings I suddenly wasn't invited to anymore. I'd been so focused on the merger, so buried in compliance documents and regulatory frameworks, that I'd missed the careful dismantling of my professional life happening right under my nose. It started 3 months earlier, though I didn't recognize it then. David began working later, staying for strategy sessions that somehow never included me, despite my being the lead analyst on the company's most critical deal. When I'd ask about these meetings, he'd kiss my forehead and say, "Just boring budget stuff, babe. Nothing you'd find interesting." I believed him because I wanted to. Because trusting the person you love should be the easiest thing in the world, then there were the small exclusions that felt like paper cuts. Coffee runs where suddenly no one asked if I wanted anything. Lunch conversations that stopped when I approached. The way Jennifer from accounting would quickly minimize her screen whenever I walked by her desk. I told myself I was being paranoid, that the stress of the merger was making me see conspiracies where none existed, but the signs were everywhere, weren't they? The way David stopped asking about my day. How he'd changed his phone password without mentioning it, something that had never mattered before because we'd always been open about everything. The night I caught him texting someone at 11 p.m., and when I asked who it was, he said, "Just work stuff," and turned the phone face down. I remember the exact moment I should have known. 2 weeks before my termination, I walked into the break room and found David and Jennifer huddled together, speaking in low voices. When they saw me, they sprang apart like teenagers caught making out. Jennifer's face flushed red, and David's smile was too bright, too forced. "Hey babe. We were just talking about the company picnic." There was no company picnic planned. Even then, I chose to trust. I chose to believe that my fiancé wouldn't actively work against me, that my colleagues respected the expertise I'd brought to every project, that my value was self-evident. I was so naive, so convinced that competence and dedication would protect me from office politics and personal betrayals. The truth is, they'd been planning my removal for months. While I was perfecting risk assessments and ensuring regulatory compliance, they were perfecting their strategy to eliminate me from the biggest success story of the company's history. David knew every detail of my work because I shared everything with him, my concerns, my discoveries, my methodologies. I gave him a roadmap to my own professional execution. What hurts most isn't even the deception, it's how easy it was for them. How readily I offered up my trust, my vulnerability, my professional secrets. I handed them the weapons they'd use against me and then wondered why the wounds cut so deep. Can I confront the hidden wounds, or will they remain buried forever? The first week after my termination, I did what any rational person would do. I fell apart completely. I stayed in my pajamas, ordered takeout, and binge-watched true crime documentaries while my phone buzzed with increasingly concerned messages from my sister. David had moved out within 2 days, claiming he needed space to process everything. The engagement ring sat on my kitchen counter like an accusation, catching the light every time I walked past, but somewhere between the third pint of Ben & Jerry's and the documentary about corporate fraud, something shifted inside me. Maybe it was hearing about other people who'd been screwed over by systems they'd trusted. Or maybe it was the investigator on screen saying, "The truth always leaves a trail, you just have to know where to look." Whatever it was, the crushing weight of victimhood started to transform into something sharper, more focused. I realized I was done being the casualty in someone else's success story. That Friday morning, I pulled myself together and did something I hadn't done since my termination. I got dressed like I meant business. Not for a job interview or a meeting, but for war. I spread every document I'd ever saved across my dining room table: emails, risk assessments, compliance reports, internal memos, regulatory filings. All the work they claimed was no longer needed, all the expertise they deemed dispensable. As I organized everything chronologically, patterns emerged that I'd been too close to see before. David's questions about specific regulatory requirements weren't casual curiosity, they were intelligence gathering. Jennifer's sudden interest in my filing systems wasn't friendly collegiality, it was reconnaissance. They hadn't just fired me. They'd systematically harvested my knowledge and then discarded me like an empty shell. But here's what they'd underestimated: I wasn't just the analyst who'd done the compliance work. I was the analyst who discovered discrepancies they didn't know I'd found. Irregularities in their financial projections that didn't quite add up. Risk factors they'd minimized in presentations to Hartwell's board. Nothing criminal, necessarily, but definitely things that would make a potential merger partner very, very nervous. I had leverage. Real leverage. The merger was scheduled to be finalized in 6 weeks. 6 weeks for me to decide what to do with information that could either ensure their success or guarantee their failure. The irony was perfect. They'd eliminated me to protect their deal, not realizing I held the keys to its destruction. I won't lie and say the decision was easy. Part of me wanted to just move on, find another job, rebuild my life without looking back. That would have been the mature thing to do, the healthy thing. But maturity and health felt like luxuries I couldn't afford when I was sitting in my empty apartment, surrounded by the wreckage of everything I'd believed in. They'd taught me that loyalty was a weakness, that trust was a liability, that playing by the rules meant playing to lose. Fine. I could learn those lessons too. The question wasn't whether I deserved better, I knew I did. The question was whether I had the courage to fight for it. To risk everything on the chance that I could rewrite the ending they'd written for me, can I find the courage to change my life, or will I hesitate when it matters most? Strategy had always been my strength. In college, I was the one who mapped out group projects with military precision. At Meridian, I was known for anticipating problems 3 steps ahead. Now, I would apply that same methodical approach to something far more personal, and far more satisfying. I spent 3 days researching everything I could find about the merger timeline, the key players at Hartwell, and the regulatory approval process. I knew from my months of preparation that Hartwell's board was particularly sensitive about compliance issues. Their previous acquisition had nearly fallen through due to undisclosed environmental liabilities. They were skittish, careful, and absolutely committed to due diligence. My plan crystallized around a simple truth: timing is everything. Too early, and they'd have time to address any concerns I raised. Too late, and the damage would be minimal. But there was a sweet spot, exactly 10 days before the final signing, when Hartwell's legal team would be conducting their last compliance review. When any new information would create maximum chaos with minimum time for damage control. I began documenting everything with the precision of a prosecutor building a case. The discrepancies I discovered weren't smoking guns, but they were troubling inconsistencies that would require investigation. Revenue projections that seemed optimistic when compared to market trends. Risk assessments that downplayed potential regulatory changes. Client retention figures that appeared to include contracts that were still under negotiation. None of it was illegal. But all of it painted a picture of a company that was perhaps not as transparent as they'd claimed. For a nervous acquiring company like Hartwell, perception was reality. I crafted 3 separate communications. The first was a detailed memo to Hartwell's compliance team, outlining my concerns as a former analyst who worked closely on the merger preparation. Professional. Factual, impossible to dismiss as a personal vendetta. The second was a more comprehensive dossier for their legal team, with supporting documentation and suggested areas for additional review. The third was an insurance policy, a summary prepared for the SEC, ready to file if Meridian tried to retaliate or discredit me. David had taught me well, hadn't he? Information was power. But only if you knew how to weaponize it strategically. I practiced my phone calls to Hartwell until I could deliver my concerns with the perfect balance of professional duty and reluctant disclosure. I debated whether to reach out, I would say, but my professional ethics require me to share information that could impact your due diligence process. I memorized the names of their key decision makers, their professional backgrounds, and their particular areas of concern. The beauty of the plan was its legitimacy. I wasn't fabricating anything or engaging in sabotage. I was simply ensuring that Hartwell had complete information before making a $300 million decision. If Meridian had nothing to hide, my communications would be inconsequential. If they did, well, that wasn't my problem anymore. I set my deadline. In 7 days, exactly 17 days before the scheduled merger completion, I would make contact with Hartwell. That would give them just enough time to demand answers and just enough time for Meridian to panic. As I finalized the timeline, I felt something I hadn't experienced in weeks: control. For the first time since that humiliating walk to the elevator, I was the one making decisions that would impact other people's lives. The power was intoxicating. Will I feel victorious when it's over, or will the consequences leave me feeling empty? The day I'd chosen dawned gray and drizzling, perfectly matching my mood. I dressed in my best suit, the navy blue one I'd worn to important presentations, and applied my makeup with the precision of someone preparing for battle. Looking in the mirror, I saw someone I barely recognized, composed, determined, dangerous. At exactly 9:15 a.m., I placed my first call to Hartwell Industries. "This is Sarah Mitchell from Hartwell's Compliance Department," came the crisp voice on the other end. "Ms. Mitchell. My name is Mia Chen. I was the senior analyst on the Meridian merger documentation until recently. I have some information that your team should review before the final approval process." There was a pause. "What kind of information?" "Discrepancies in their risk assessments and financial projections that weren't included in the materials provided to your team. I believe you'll want to examine these before proceeding." The conversation lasted 12 minutes. Sarah Mitchell was thorough, professional, and increasingly concerned as I walked her through each inconsistency with clinical precision. By the end of the call, she'd requested that I send everything immediately and had scheduled a follow-up call with their legal team for the next morning. Phase 1, complete. My phone rang within 2 hours. David's name appeared on the screen, and for a moment, my carefully constructed composure wavered. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity won. "Mia. His voice was tight, controlled. "We need to talk." "Do we?" I kept my tone light, almost friendly. "I thought we'd said everything we needed to say." "Don't play games. I know you contacted Hartwell." The speed of his discovery was impressive. Clearly, Hartwell had wasted no time in demanding explanations from Meridian. I could picture the emergency meetings, the panicked phone calls, the sudden realization that their discarded analyst had become their biggest threat. "I shared some professional concerns," I said calmly. "Surely you'd want Hartwell to have complete information before making such a significant investment." "This is about us, isn't it? About our relationship?" The question hung in the air between us, loaded with implications. Part of me wanted to tell him yes, that this was personal, that he'd hurt me so deeply that destroying his career felt like justice. But that would have diminished what I'd accomplished. This wasn't just about revenge, it was about reclaiming my professional integrity. "This is about truth, David. Something you might not recognize anymore." By the end of that day, I'd spoken with 3 different people at Hartwell, each conversation more detailed than the last. I'd provided documentation, answered technical questions, and watched from a distance as Meridian's leadership team scrambled to contain the damage. My former colleagues were working overtime, preparing responses to questions they'd hoped never to face. The most satisfying moment came at 4:30 p.m. when Jennifer from accounting called me. Jennifer, who'd helped orchestrate my removal, who'd whispered with David in break rooms while I'd worked late perfecting their merger documents. "Mia, please," she said, her voice shaking. "They're asking about specific projections that you prepared. We need your help to explain the methodology." The irony was delicious. "I'm no longer employed by Meridian," I reminded her. "Remember? This could destroy the deal. Everyone's jobs are on the line." "Then maybe you should have thought of that before you destroyed mine." As I hung up, I felt a surge of power unlike anything I'd ever experienced. For months, I'd been invisible, dispensable, easily replaced. Now, suddenly, I was the most important person in their world, the one person who could save or sink their future. Will I feel relieved after this, or will it leave me questioning everything? 3 days after my calls to Hartwell, the merger was officially suspended pending additional due diligence review. The news broke in the industry publications by Thursday morning, and my phone started ringing with calls from former colleagues, reporters, and headhunters who'd suddenly remembered my existence. I should have felt vindicated, triumphant. Instead, I found myself sitting on my couch at 2 p.m. in my pajamas, staring at the wall and feeling empty. The hollow victory tasted like ash in my mouth. Yes, I'd proven my worth. The entire deal had ground to a halt because of information only I possessed. Yes, I'd demonstrated that they'd made a catastrophic error in discarding me. But watching the local business news report on Meridian's unexpected complications, seeing the stress etched on the faces of people I'd once considered friends, I began to question what exactly I'd won. David showed up at my apartment that evening, looking like he hadn't slept in days. When I opened the door, we stared at each other for a long moment, the woman who'd destroyed his career and the man who'd destroyed her heart. "The deal's dead," he said simply. Hartwell pulled out completely. "They're not just suspending, they're walking away." I'd expected this news to feel like victory. Instead, it felt like watching a car accident in slow motion. "I'm sorry," I said, and was surprised to realize I partially meant it. "Are you?" His eyes searched my face. "Because 60 people are going to lose their jobs when the acquisition money doesn't come through. 60 people who had nothing to do with what happened between us." The guilt hit me like a physical blow. In my careful planning, I'd focused so intently on the key players, David, Jennifer, the executives who'd orchestrated my removal, that I'd barely considered the administrative assistants, the junior analysts, the marketing coordinator who'd always brought homemade cookies to Friday meetings. They were casualties in a war they didn't even know was being fought. "This isn't about us," I said, but even as the words left my mouth, they felt like a lie. "Isn't it?" David stepped closer, and I could see the exhaustion in his eyes. "You had every right to be angry. What we did to you was wrong. But this?" He gestured vaguely toward the space between us, encompassing everything that had happened. "This feels like something else entirely." After he left, I spent hours walking through my neighborhood, trying to process the tangled mess of emotions churning in my chest. Relief, guilt, satisfaction, regret, they all swirled together until I couldn't distinguish one from another. I'd wanted them to understand what it felt like to be powerless. To have your future decided by people who didn't care about the collateral damage. Mission accomplished. But somewhere in the execution, I'd become the person making decisions about other people's futures without considering the collateral damage. The worst part was the silence. My phone, which had been buzzing constantly during the execution phase, now sat quietly on my kitchen counter. The calls from Hartwell had stopped. They'd gotten what they needed from me. My former colleagues had nothing left to say. Even the reporters had moved on to other stories. I was alone with the consequences of my choices. Trying to figure out whether the person I'd become in pursuit of justice was someone I could live with. Has revenge really brought me peace, or is there more healing to be done? 2 weeks after the merger collapse, I was offered 3 job interviews and 2 consulting contracts. Word had spread through the industry that I was the analyst who'd single-handedly derailed a $300 million deal, and suddenly everyone wanted to know what I might uncover in their organizations. The irony wasn't lost on me. My professional value had never been higher, built on the ruins of my former employer, but as I sat in a coffee shop preparing for my first interview, something shifted inside me. The hiring manager was clearly more interested in my capacity for corporate warfare than my analytical skills. She kept steering the conversation toward my strategic thinking and decisive action, speaking in code about my willingness to use information as a weapon. We value employees who aren't afraid to make tough decisions, she said, leaning forward conspiratorially. Sometimes you have to be willing to do what others won't. I excused myself to the bathroom and stared at my reflection in the fluorescent lighting. The woman looking back at me was polished, professional, successful, and completely unfamiliar. When had I become someone whose greatest professional achievement was destroying other people's dreams? That night, I called my sister Elena, who'd been checking on me regularly but giving me space to process everything. I think I've become someone I don't recognize, I told her. What do you mean? I destroyed 60 people's jobs because I was angry at 2 people. And the worst part is, I was good at it. Really good at it. Elena was quiet for a moment. Do you regret stopping the merger? The question caught me off guard because the answer wasn't simple. I regret how much I enjoyed it, I said finally. I regret that it felt more satisfying than any legitimate success I'd ever had. Maybe that's because you'd never felt powerful before, she said gently. But power built on other people's pain isn't real power, Mia. It's just borrowed destruction. Her words stayed with me as I began declining the job offers that came my way. Not because I didn't need work, but because I refused to build a career on being the person companies hired to destroy their competitors. I wanted to be valued for what I could build, not what I could tear down. Instead, I started doing something I'd never done before. I began reaching out to the people affected by the merger collapse. Not to apologize, exactly, but to understand the full scope of what had happened. I learned that Marcus from IT had already found a better position. Sarah from marketing was starting her own consulting firm. 3 people had been hired by Hartwell for different projects. The human cost wasn't as catastrophic as I'd feared, but it was real. And owning that reality was part of accepting who I'd become and who I wanted to be moving forward. I also did something harder. I wrote a letter to David. Not to reconcile or to rehash our relationship, but to acknowledge that while his betrayal was real and painful, my response had been about more than justice. It had been about proving I mattered, that I couldn't be discarded without consequences. I needed to feel powerful again, I wrote. But I learned that the kind of power that comes from other people's destruction isn't actually power at all. It's just anger wearing a business suit. For the first time in months, I felt like I was moving towards something instead of away from something. I was building a life based on my values rather than my wounds. Am I ready to move forward, or is there still something I need to let go of? 6 months later, I'm sitting in my new office, a converted bedroom in my apartment that overlooks the garden I've started tending. The morning light streams through windows I actually have time to keep clean, illuminating the vision board I created, not of career achievements or financial goals, but of the kind of person I want to be. I'm freelancing now, providing compliance consulting for small and mid-sized companies that need expertise but can't afford full-time analysts. It's challenging work that pays about 60% of what I made at Meridian, but every project I complete adds value to someone's dream instead of destroying it. Last week, I helped a family-owned manufacturing company navigate regulatory requirements that would have otherwise forced it to close. The grateful email from the owner's daughter reminded me why I fell in love with this work in the first place. The industry talk about the Meridian Hartwell collapse has died down, replaced by newer scandals and fresher drama. David got a position with a smaller firm. I heard it through mutual connections, and felt nothing more than mild curiosity. The sharp edges of that betrayal have worn smooth through time and understanding. What he did hurt me deeply, but what I did in response taught me something more valuable. that my worth isn't determined by other people's recognition or rejection. I've started dating again. Carefully and intentionally. Not because I need someone to complete me, but because I finally feel complete enough to share my life with someone else. The man I'm seeing now, Marcus, different Marcus, not from IT, makes me laugh and challenges my ideas and has never once asked about my involvement in any corporate drama. When I told him the story over dinner last month, he listened thoughtfully and then said, "It sounds like you learned something important about yourself." No judgment. No fascination with the power play, just recognition of growth. Elena visits more often now. And we've started taking weekend hiking trips together. On our last excursion, she commented that I seem lighter somehow, less burdened by the need to prove anything to anyone. "You used to carry yourself like you were constantly preparing for battle," she said. "Now you just seem present." She's right. I am present in a way I never was before, not plotting 3 steps ahead, not analyzing every interaction for signs of betrayal, not building walls to protect myself from future disappointment. I'm just here, in my life, making daily choices that align with who I want to be rather than who I think I should be. I keep one reminder of that time on my desk, not the termination letter or angry emails, but a photo from the company picnic that never happened, the one Jennifer and David had lied about. I found it while cleaning out old files, a picture of the team from the previous year's event, everyone smiling and relaxed. I look happy in that photo, genuinely happy, and it reminds me that before the betrayal and revenge and destruction, there was joy. There was a version of me who trusted easily and worked with passion and believed in the fundamental goodness of the people around her. I'm not that naive anymore, but I've chosen to remain open. I've learned that protecting yourself from betrayal by building walls just creates a different kind of prison. Real strength isn't about being invulnerable, it's about being able to recover, to grow. To choose healing over hardness. The merger that consumed so much of my energy and emotion happened exactly as it was meant to happen. Not because of cosmic justice or karmic balance, but because I chose to act from pain instead of wisdom. I've made peace with that choice and its consequences. I've also made peace with the person I became in my darkest moment. Because she led me to who I am now. Today is the first day in over a year that I woke up without thinking about Meridian, about David, or about that cardboard box walk to the elevator. Instead, I thought about the client presentation I'm giving this afternoon, the dinner I'm cooking tonight, and the book I'm reading before bed. Simple, present moment thoughts from a life reclaimed and a future embraced. I am finally, completely, peacefully free.